Chapter 23 of The Airplane Boys Among the Clouds. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Airplane Boys Among the Clouds by John Luther Langworthy. The Bird Boys Triumph. Crawl in here. As he said this, Frank Bird pushed his nearly exhausted cousin into a narrow crevice of the rock. It was a retreat which he had noticed on their first visit to the crown of Old Thundertop. At that time Frank had made up his mind that if ever he were marooned on that lonely mountain crest, he would seek temporary shelter there. Little had he dreamed of what the future held for himself and Andy, and that one day he would have good cause to remember with thanksgiving that same split in the massive rock. A surprise awaited them, and of an agreeable nature. Andy had not crawled 5 feet inside the shelter than he gave utterance to a loud cry. "Percy, is this you?" Frank heard him say, with positive relief in his voice. "Yes, all that's left of me," came a reply. "We got banged awful hard on the rock when my machine played that nasty trick on me. It was all I could do to crawl here, and Sandy had to help pull me. I reckon my leg's broken." "Is Sandy there too?" demanded Frank. "Yes, and banged up some too, but mighty glad he didn't go kerflummock down to them rocks when Percy foozled," grumbled another voice. "Let up on that, won't you?" the other snarled. "I tell you it was all the fault of the blamed cranky engine. It went bad on me just at that time the flaw struck us on the side. Keep a still tongue between your teeth, Sandy Hollingshead." That was Percy all over. Even in this grave crisis he would not admit having made an error of judgment, but was determined to lay all the blame upon the faulty construction of the aeroplane. But Frank was mighty glad that both boys had escaped the terrible fate to which they had seemed doomed at the time their machine smashed down on the plateau. "We're all lucky fellows," he said cheerily, "and since we've got to bunk together for some time, let's make the best of a bad bargain. Here, Andy, take this bit of candle after I've lighted it, and hold it over while I see if I can do anything to help Percy. We ought to be able to tell whether his leg is broken or not, and perhaps relieve his suffering some." This they did, and after a close examination both declared that beyond a severe wrench and some bruises there was nothing the matter. Any ordinary lad would have felt grateful for this intelligence. Percy only growled the more, declaring that if his leg was not broken it felt worse than such a condition would bring. "What can we do, Frank?" asked Andy, apprehensively, as he listened to the roar of the storm without. "Must we stay up here all night?" "I'm afraid that will be the result of our foolishness," remarked the other, gravely, "and we ought to be thankful that our punishment isn't any worse." The summer storm began to die out after an hour, but by then the afternoon had drawn near an end, so that it was folly to even think of making any effort looking toward their escape from the rocky crest of Old Thundertop. Frank crawled out of the friendly crevice, and after a short time returned, to bring good news. "So far as I can see, the biplane isn't badly damaged," he said to Andy. "Hey, you ain't going to desert us up here, I hope," cried Percy in sudden alarm, which remark proved how much he was depending on Frank, after all, to get them out of the bad scrape. "Not at all," came the reply. "Nobody can go down till morning. But if the machine can be coaxed to work decently then, I can carry the whole bunch, one at a time, to the ground." This prospect of being brought home by a victorious rival was apparently not very pleasant to Percy's proud soul. He grumbled for a bit, and then said, "Guess you'll have to drop me in our front yard then, 'cause I won't be able to crawl home. I don't want to be seen in this shape, Frank Bird. Remember that." "Sure, take you wherever you say, Percy, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Perhaps we may have to get down by means of a rope after all," the good-natured young aviator replied. As night came on, the clouds rolled away from the summit of the mountain, and Frank could see the light of the town far below. He knew only too well that many anxious hearts would be suffering because of the dreadful uncertainty that hung over the fate of the quartet of venturesome aeroplane boys. "I'm going to find some way to let them know we're all safe," he said finally. "But how?" demanded Andy. "If If it was daylight, we could stand out in a row, and they'd see us through the glasses. Or we could use the wigwag code, which some of the Boy Scouts would translate. But in the dark, that's just what occurred to me," said Frank quickly. "Listen, Andy. Strange to say, our little searchlight on the biplane escaped being broken when we landed so roughly. I mean to use that to signal with." At that his cousin gave vent to an exclamation of delight. "Great! It sure takes you to think up these things, Frank," he cried. Accordingly, Frank secured the acetylene lamp, and having lighted the same, stood out where his actions could surely be seen by some of the anxious watchers in Bloomsbury. Then he started to wave the light slowly but methodically, so as to induce some sort of reply. After about 10 minutes he called out to Andy and the others. "One of the scouts is starting to answer with a lantern, and now to try and make him understand that the whole 4 of us are up here safe and will stay until morning." Even the groaning Percy managed to crawl to the mouth of the crevice to watch operations. Frank persisted until he knew that his message had been understood, for the answer had come OK. "Now we can take things more comfortably, because we know they won't be worrying about us," he said. But that was a night never to be forgotten. Nobody obtained much sleep, for what with the novelty of their situation, the hard rock underneath, and the almost constant complaints of Percy, who was really in great pain, they watched the stars in their wonderful procession toward the west, until finally dawn began to appear. As soon as it was fairly light, Frank got busy, examined his biplane in the most thorough manner, for it would never do to have a slip, once he quitted the safety of the plateau. Rather than take chances, he would have waited until help had arrived at the bottom of the cliff, with a rope which could be hauled up by means of a cord, or carried up the chipped footholds by an agile lad like Larry. But he found that his machine could be readily put in apple pie condition. The sun was up before things were ready. Percy declined to be the first to accompany him for some reason or other, so Andy went. The trip to Bloomsbury was made without a single hitch, and great was the rejoicing when they landed on the commons. But remembering his promise, Frank did not linger. He succeeded in transporting Sandy the next trip, and that worthy made haste to lose himself in the crowd without even thanking his rescuer. Last of all, Percy was carried to his home. Frank could not land in the Carberry yard on account of the trees, but he did close by, and as the injured boy's mother, as well as a score of others, were eagerly waiting, there would be little difficulty in getting Percy indoors. "I suppose I ought to thank you, Frank, for this," said the injured boy with a half-surly look on his face, which, however, may have been caused by his pain. "Don't mention it, Percy," smiled Frank. "I'm sure you would have done the same for me. Hope you get out soon again, and sorry you lost your biplane. Better luck next time." And with that he turned away. Having broken away from the crowds on the commons, the 2 bird boys, accompanied by their friends, Larry, Elephant, and Stuttering Nat, once again sought the privacy of their dear old workshop. Here they were sprawled, taking it as easy as possible, and resting their aching muscles, as they went over the stirring events of the accident again and again, when into the shop strode Mr. Marsh and his friend Mr. Longley. The former gentleman at once approached Frank, who, understanding that the seal of mystery that had so long cloaked his actions was about to be removed, stood up. "Shake hands, Frank, won't you?" said the other, with a look of warm admiration on his face that quite captured the young aviator. "Longley here has copies of the papers he promised your cousin, containing an account of your little episode with the escaped convict. But, Frank, I've got another mission here, and I hope you'll be of a mind to accept the offer I want to make on behalf of the well-known firm making the very brand of aeroplane you pin your faith to. Will you listen?" "Certainly, sir," Frank answered, accepting the hand that was outstretched. "As to accepting any offer, that is another matter entirely, but please go on." Andy, Larry, and the other 2 listened eagerly, for they believed that the bird boys were about to be given as great a compliment as any aviator could hope for. "I represent the company that makes the best aeroplane in the country. I am empowered to be constantly on the watch for just such daring yet cautious aviators as you two have proven yourselves. That was why I came here to Bloomsbury, because we knew something of what you had been doing. And I want to say right here that, personally, I firmly believe those glowing reports have been in no way exaggerated, for you both had the makings of admirable aviators in you, after you have been in the company of the chief of them all for a few weeks. And I hope you won't decide too hastily and turn an offer down without due consideration. Are you open to an engagement for a year to come with my company and prove to the public what they claim for their make of machine?" Frank shook his head, though with a pleased smile, for who would not have felt a thrill of pride at such a remarkable evidence of confidence in his abilities? This gentleman knew every famous flyer of the day, and that he should rate the bird boys as among those who were called was a compliment worth having. "I'm afraid we'll have to disappoint you, Mr. Marsh," he said. "In the first place, our fathers would not want us to become public birdmen, and in the second, we expect to attend school for several years yet before branching out. No, please forget it. I believe in the merits of the aeroplane I've been using. The new features are wonderful, and as long as I continue to fly, I expect to stick by that make. But neither of us are professionals, and that will have to end it." Which it, of course, did. Mr. March, much against his will, was compelled to leave Bloomsbury without having signed the bird boys for his enterprising company. But at least he had the satisfaction of knowing that no rival concern could succeed any better than he had. Just as Frank had said, Percy's injuries were not serious enough to keep him shut up more than a few days. Many times did Frank and Andy have to narrate the entire story of that hazardous feat connected with the race. They never made themselves out heroes, but most people, knowing their modesty, could read between the lines, and understood that Percy Carberry and Sandy owed much to the bird boys. Of course, such a backset could not long deter Percy from flying. His rich and indulgent mother would supply the cash for another biplane in due season, but it was to be hoped that his experiences might teach him more caution. Frank himself was resolved never again to be tempted into risking his life unnecessarily, simply because a reckless rival threatened to dub him a coward. As the bird boys were thoroughly imbued with the aviator's spirit, it might easily be set down as positive that as time went on they would continue to study the science of flying, and take advantage of every opportunity that presented itself for indulging in their favorite sport. And we shall certainly hope to meet them again in the near future, when possibly other of their stirring adventures call for a new volume concerning the bird boys. End of Chapter 23. End of the Airplane Boys Among the Clouds by John Luther Langworthy.